Ready to dive into some Zen wisdom? Today we're taking a deep dive into Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Shunryu Suzuki.
A classic.
It really is. And what's great is it's a collection of his talks, so it feels very direct and personal, like we're getting a glimpse into his actual teaching style.
Yeah, and he doesn't sugarcoat anything. It's refreshing.
Totally. And speaking of direct, he kind of throws us a curveball early on with that whole, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are few line.
Right.
I gotta admit, the first time I read that, I was like, wait a minute, isn't the goal to become an expert? So help us out here. What's so special about this beginner's mind thing in Zen?
Well, it's definitely a core concept in Zen, and I think it's often misinterpreted. It's not about, throwing away all your knowledge or acting like you don't know anything.
Okay, so not like pretending to be clueless.
Exactly. Think about a time when you felt stuck, like your own expertise was actually holding you back.
Oh, I've been there.
Right. That's where beginner's mind can be so powerful. It's about approaching everything with a sense of openness, of curiosity, almost like you're seeing it for the very first time.
So even if you've been doing something for years, there's always something new to discover if you approach it with those fresh eyes.
Exactly. Imagine a master carpenter, right?
Yeah.
Someone who's been crafting furniture for decades. Incredible skill. But what if they get so attached to their methods, their expert mind, that they stop really seeing the wood itself?
Like they're so focused on the how-to that they miss the possibilities.
Yes, they might miss out on a whole new level of creativity, of expression, because they're clinging to what they already know.
So beginner's mind is kind of about staying open to those new possibilities, even when we think we've got it all figured out.
Exactly. And that's why Suzuki's teachings have resonated with so many people, from artists and musicians to entrepreneurs and, yeah, even tech visionaries like Steve Jobs.
Ah, interesting. I didn't realize Steve Jobs was into Zen.
He was. And he often talked about the importance of beginner's mind for creativity and innovation. It's about tapping into that potential within ourselves, not getting caught up in some external definition of expert.
That's a good way to put it. It's about the internal shift, not just checking boxes on some achievement list.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the more, practical side of Zen, the actual practice. Suzuki spends a good chunk of Zen Mind, beginner's mind, talking about zazen, which is, sitting meditation. And I have to be honest, with all the focus on posture and breathing and all that, part of me was thinking, is this really just about how you sit?
It's a common question, and it gets to the heart of what Zen practice is all about.
Yeah.
Because on the surface, it can seem like a contradiction, right? Zen emphasizes freedom, liberation. And yet, here we are, focusing on something as seemingly rigid as posture.
Right, like Zen mind, perfect posture, find your bliss. It did feel a bit intimidating at first.
But it's not about, contorting yourself into some ideal Zen pose or anything.
Okay, good to know, because I'm not sure I could pull that off.
Yeah, it's not about that at all. It's more like, think about when you really want to give someone your full attention. You put down your phone, you turn towards them, you make space for them. It's that kind of presence, that quality of attention that zazen helps to cultivate.
So it's less about achieving the perfect posture and more about cultivating this mindful presence that then hopefully extends beyond just when you're sitting on the cushion.
Yes, exactly. And Suzuki actually addresses this directly. He says, to take this posture is itself to have the right state of mind. He points out that how we approach our practice, even something as simple as sitting, it's a reflection of our state of mind in that moment.
So it's like zazen is kind of like a training ground for bringing that awareness into every aspect of our lives.
Precisely. It's about developing that muscle of presence, so to speak, so that it becomes more and more natural, not just this thing we do for 30 minutes a day.
It reminds me of that analogy Suzuki uses in the book about the frog. He talks about how the frog sits so perfectly still, just fully present and aware, but it's not making a big deal out of it. It's just being a frog.
Oh, I love that analogy. It's so perfect, right? It really gets at the essence of zazen, and I think of Zen practice in general. It's not about forcing ourselves into some extraordinary state of being, some blissful trance or something. It's about aligning with our natural state of presence, much like that frog, just effortlessly embodying its, frogness.
Right. No striving, no forcing, just being. Easier said than done, though, right?
Absolutely. And Suzuki acknowledges that. He talks about how practice takes effort. But, and this is important, he's careful to distinguish between what he calls right effort and just trying too hard.
There's that paradox, again, right? He talks about effort, but then also this idea of not trying, which I'll admit kind of threw me at first.
Yeah, it's a common paradox in Zen. But what Suzuki is getting at is that
Mhm.
right effort is really about bringing your full attention to whatever you're doing in that moment without getting caught up in the outcome, in the desire for things to be a certain way.
So let's say my mind is racing during Zizen, which, let's be real, it happens. The right effort is not to beat myself up about it, but just to notice those thoughts, acknowledge them, and then gently guide my attention back to my breath, back to the present moment.
Exactly. It's about cultivating this, like a passionate awareness of our experience without judging it or trying to force it to fit into some, I don't know, preconceived notion of what meditation should be. And this actually ties into another one of Suzuki's really helpful analogies, the one about pulling out the weeds to nourish the plant.
Ah, yes, the weeds metaphor, such a vivid image. But being grateful for the weeds in our minds, that's a tough one. Can you unpack that a little bit?
It does seem a little backwards at first, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The way Suzuki explains that, those weeds, those like those difficult thoughts and emotions or those little doubts that just keep popping up, they're not the enemy.
Not something to be, like, ripped out and banished forever.
Exactly. They're just
Yeah.
part of the landscape of our minds.
Yeah.
And rather than getting totally caught up in them, we could actually use them as opportunities for growth.
So instead of getting frustrated when those weeds inevitably pop up, we can just acknowledge them, be curious about them even, and then, like, let them go.
Exactly. Suzuki talks about it almost like they become compost for our practice.
Okay, I like that. Turning those pesky weeds into something that helps us grow.
Right. And it made me think about another important thing Suzuki talks about, which is embracing paradox. He talks about like unity and variety, day and night, good and bad, not as opposites, but as two sides of the same coin.
Instead of getting stuck in that binary thinking, we can try to see the interconnectedness of it all.
Yes, it's about recognizing that even in those challenging moments, those kind of weed-filled moments, as we're calling them, there's potential for growth and understanding.
It's like reframing our relationship with those difficult parts of ourselves.
And with life itself, really. And that's, I think, what's so beautiful about Suzuki's teachings. It's like this invitation to engage with life from a place of wisdom and compassion and even humor, I think.
It's funny you should mention that because it really does feel like there's a sense of humor woven through Suzuki's writing, even when he's talking about some pretty deep stuff.
Right. He's not afraid to be playful with it all. And it's probably part of why his work continues to resonate with people from all walks of life, even all these years later.
I mean, it's amazing to think this book was written over 50 years ago, right? Yet it feels incredibly relevant to the challenges we face today. That search for meaning, for authenticity, in a world that can feel pretty overwhelming.
Absolutely. It speaks to that timeless wisdom within Zen and to Suzuki's incredible ability to, I don't know, translate it into a language that we can connect with on a very human level.
And it's not just about finding meaning for ourselves, right? Suzuki talks about how interconnected we all are, encouraging us to extend that compassion and understanding outwards. It becomes about how we treat each other, how we move through the world.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the Buddha nature in ourselves and in everyone else, and then living in a way that reflects that.
Which brings us back to this idea of beginner's mind, doesn't it? Because it's not enough to just, like, intellectually get these concepts. It's about actually putting them into practice in our daily lives.
Absolutely. I mean, it's in those moments, right? Like when you're totally stressed trying to beat a deadline or you're stuck in traffic, that's when the real work begins. It's about catching ourselves when we fall into those old patterns, those habits of thinking and reacting, and just gently guiding ourselves back to that place of openness and curiosity.
So it's not about achieving some, like, perfect, unwavering state of Zen. More like a constant practice of coming back to that beginner's mind over and over again.
Yes, it's a lifelong journey, not a destination,
Yeah,
which I think is what makes it so freeing. There's always more to learn, more to discover, more to appreciate.
absolutely. Well, this deep dive into Zen mind, beginner's mind, has been, I gotta say, pretty inspiring. It's given me a lot to think about.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's been great chatting with you about it.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this exploration of Zen. We'll leave you with a final thought from Suzuki himself. Everything is taking Buddha's activity, each thing in its own way. So as you move through your world today, we invite you to ask yourself, what would it look like to approach each moment, each encounter with that same beginner's mind?